Today on Rates and Barrels, if we gave you 4 teams, could you pick one that actually wins this year's World Series?
And could the Tigers flip the script on the Guardians and pull the rug out from under them just like the Guardians did last year?
Plus, we check in on who is doing well in the ABS Challenge system. Let's go. Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, June 3rd. Derek Van Ripe, Reno Saris, and Jed Lowry here with you. We are starting today's show with a simple and fun exercise, with it being the 3rd day of June. If I gave you guys 4 bites at the apple, your choice of 4 teams to win the World Series, could you get it right? Have we seen enough baseball? Do we know enough about this year's teams to make you confident that you'd get it across 4 teams? Because if you look at playoff odds on a day like today, and World Series odds more specifically, you could gather up the top 4 teams and come in with a number at or above 50% to win the World Series. Seems pretty fair, right? So, Jed, I'm just curious. Do you think this is an appropriate time to say your choice, 4 teams or the field? And which side of that would you rather be on? Would you rather choose 4 teams, or would you rather let someone else choose 4 and take the 26 leftovers?
The only thing that can change outside of injuries, right, which you can't predict anyway, is the trade deadline at this point. But I think we talked about this in our production call. I think it's fun enough to do. And so I think there's enough. I think it's worthy. We have enough information. I would probably take one of the 4 teams that I wrote down over the field at this point, just because why not? It's fun, and we're at a point in the season. We have a lot of information. And I did go heavy on the run differential for mine. I went Dodgers, Braves, Yankees, Brewers. So I picked the 4. I'm taking the 4 teams that have proven early in the season that they have the ability to prevent runs and score a lot of runs. And even though the Brewers don't have the heaviest hitting lineup, they just do such a good job of preventing runs. And then they have a lineup that is built around the ethos of the players around them.
Interesting. Okay. What's your first thought as you try to break this down? Do you go straight to the Fangraphs odds or the Pacoda odds and just scoop up the 4 favorites? I mean, if you're going that route, that would land you on most of what Jed had. It'd get you the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mariners, and the Braves. It doesn't actually matter between Fangraphs and Pacoda which one you choose. They're the top 4 teams based on World Series win probability in each of those projection systems. Is that the way you'd tackle it, or would you do something a little bit different?
Yeah, I guess that would be, in other words, the difference between looking at run differential to date and projected run differential. Sort of adding what has happened to what is projected to happen. If you just sort by end of season projected win total on Fangraphs, you get Dodgers, Braves, Yankees, Brewers. The reason why I was going to pick the Mariners over the Brewers is because the Brewers are scoring 5 runs a game right now. They're projected to score 4.5. It's one of the biggest direction is one of the biggest differences in that direction. When I look at this offense, I'm surprised that they score 5 runs a game. And, a little bit like the Rays, I kind of think, I understand that you're doing something different. I understand that you are hitting the ball, on the ground. You're hitting the ball. You're not pulling the ball. You're not pulling the ball in the air. You're not striking out. The Brewers and Rays are built very similarly in that regard. The reason I take the Brewers over the Rays is that they are better defenders than the Rays at almost every position. And then they're also, the Brewers have way more pitching depth. The Rays, are still running Steven Matz out there right now. And they've got Joe Boyle, and I don't know that they have a lot more going on in the starting rotation, whereas the Brewers seem to just have arm after arm. By design, of course. They traded for arms. They like to do it this way. So anyway, I'm taking the Brewers over the Rays, but I'm taking the Mariners over the Brewers and Rays because they are playing closer to their projected numbers. They are who they are projected to. And then I just feel like they have an easier road. I think that the AL is easier. And so if we're picking now to go all the way to the World Series, you have to think not only do you make the playoffs, but then what happens? Who are you facing in the playoffs? And I feel like the Dodgers and Braves are, if you were ranking them, you'd put both of them ahead of the Brewers or Mariners or whatever, and you might put them both ahead of the Yankees if that's what the projections say for in terms of end of season win totals. In any case, I'm going to take one of those four because they just look so dominant right now. I mean, I don't know. I hate to be, recency bias. If I was going to expand my mind and say, who would I take that's not in that four right now? I think I'd have to say, the Phillies, getting together, even though they look a little bit old. The Pirates just making it there, maybe on pitching, just dominant pitching through the playoffs. And then the Cubs. Are a good team, and maybe even the Padres if the three hitters ever get going. But I just don't. The AL is somehow easier, but also there are more NL sleeper guys that I'd want. Any case, I think it's a fun thing to think about because you have to go against your own recency bias and say, hey, these. Four teams. How often has it happened that the four best teams around now, are the teams that win it all?
It's kind of 50-50 if you look at the last 6 full season winners. I'm throwing out 2020 because it was a 60-game sprint season, expanded playoff field. Everything about that year was so weird. We just wouldn't have really done this exercise then. But you look at the Nats in 2019, that was the team that rallied back from a brutal start through the first 6-7 weeks of the season. The Braves in 2021 and the Rangers in 2023, they all won the World Series, and I think pretty clearly would not have been in a group of 4 we would have chosen in the first week of June, right? So that's why I think this exercise is fun. I think we're right at that point where we know just enough where you can feel good about choosing a group of 4 teams and probably having the World Series winner in there, but there's enough time left. Things can shift, key players go down, a big trade deadline. Some of the teams that have underperformed might play to their projections and play some of their best ball at the exact right time of year, and you might find yourself with that group of 26 actually giving you several bites at the apple. I mean, just by pure numbers, you're going to have more playoff teams than the person who gets to choose their 4. And we know playoff baseball is chaotic by nature. So I look at the exercise and like the first thing I'm thinking is maybe I'd give you guys your choice of the 4. And that's probably a little more risky in the current Dodgers dynasty we're in than it would be in a typical year, but only by a little bit. I mean, there's some pretty reasonable scenario. It's like, think about the Dodgers and the pitching injuries they're dealing with right now. They don't get to choose when bone spurs are going to be a problem for their pitchers or when Tyler Glasnell's tall guy back stuff becomes an issue or if Yoshinobu Yamamoto is going to have some shoulder trouble like did a couple years ago. Like, those things can pop up at any time. And I think is for a star-powered older roster, the wear and tear of a season can build up and come and bite you in August, September, and October, even if it's not biting you badly right now.
And what does the Yankees look like? The Yankees lineup look like without Aaron Judge?
Right.
He's dealing with some sort of bone bruise right now that's affecting. It's on top of his rib cage and affecting his shoulder. What's the worst prognosis that could have? And, could it just lessen his impact the rest of the way? And how much of the lineup revolves around him? What if Stanton, doesn't come back or comes back and then goes away again? These are all plausible things. The Yankees pitching looks good and looks like it could withstand an injury or two, but I think the lineup is actually maybe a little bit shakier than the pitching.
Yeah, I think a lot of this too is pitching depth, and if looking back, when you were talking about, you got to look at kind of the bracket and where you're coming from, right? And I was thinking about this with my 3 picks with 3 NL, like there's a pretty inherent flaw in that, right? Only one team is actually going to end up in the World Series from those 3, but then you look at the AL, and there's not a lot to really be really excited about, right? Like the Rays are playing well, but to your point, like the starting pitching isn't super inspiring in terms of the stuff or the names. The Mariners have, one of the best young cores of pitching, in recent memory, but there's a lot left to be desired on the hitting, which I feel like we have this conversation about the Mariners at every point, at this point every season over the last few. But they've called up the Colt Emerson kid. He looks like he can be a performer. And I don't know. I'm still not ready to fully buy in on that yet. So, and to the Yankees starting pitching depth, it's hard to not look at that starting pitching and not, think that they're going to go a long ways.
A note on the trade deadline. Another reason that I thought the Mariners were interesting is that they have shown the ability to go get bats at the trade deadline in recent years. And I just wonder if, that lineup looks like one more bat could be transformative. And I know that the actual impact in terms of wins above replacement and all that stuff for, 2 months of one player doesn't normally, transform a team. But at the same time, like, when you're talking about a Mariners team that's building depth and like getting longer at the bottom with these young players, just pushing Young and Emerson down to 8th and 9th and having like a quality, 4th or 5th hitter that they got at the trade deadline might be a big deal. I don't know exactly what position I want him to play, but with Brendan Donovan there, you have a lot of flexibility. You can move guys around. So I think the Mariners adding a bat might be, a sneaky way for them to win it all.
Yeah, I just, I agree with you. If it all works out, there's still the element of, kind of integrating into the clubhouse. You're coming into a new environment. You're coming into new coaches, new fan base, doesn't know you. Like there's,
Tough
these guys are all
park.
professionals. Yeah. Different home park. Like it's just, there's a level of going through the WAR together for the whole season where those trade deadline bats, they can come in and it feels like it's going to either go one way or the other. Right. And if, the philosophy of adding the big bat at the deadline as like a recurring theme, is something that, you're just trying to catch lightning on a bottle on that. And, I get
That's
it,
an
right?
interesting
Like,
point. It might be harder than our pitcher, right? Because the pitcher, you like kind of the day to day is like, just work with the pitching coach, just get out there, just execute your pitches. It's not, it's not as much of the camaraderie of a lineup or whatever. It's not.
Yeah, there's a chemistry to the lineup. There's a chemistry to the lineup. There's trust.
If you're an infielder, there's a chemistry to the infield defensively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not trying to make this like overly touchy-feely, old school baseball, right? But I'm saying that is an element of like learning tendencies. Listen, some guys, come back into the dugout after hitting a ball hard, right? And the initial reaction is like, "Hey, great swing." So some guys hate that, right?
Yeah.
Coco Crisp.
Some guys throw their hat. Some guys hate the hat throwers, right?
Yeah, like Coco Crisp, right? Like, this is something because I played with Coco for so long, right? Like he that's the last thing he wanted to hear. That's the last thing he wanted to hear is like he hits a rocket, right? Somebody makes a great play. Everybody be like, hey, great swing, right? He's like, that's the type of stuff that would set him off. He would hate it.
Wow.
So you would, you learn after playing with him that like, okay, like, you just like, Coco made an out, like, it's a great swing, but you don't express that to him, right? Because, that's just, you learn these little idiosyncrasies throughout the year that, with only 2 months left to go, like I said, it could go great or it couldn't.
All right, so just to reset the groups for a second, Jed took the Dodgers, Yankees, Braves, and Brewers as the 4 teams he'd want. And if any of those 4 teams win the World Series, he'd be right. You went Dodgers, Yankees, Mariners, Braves, right? You kind of took the 4 chalk. Okay. I think I just don't want the 4. I just want to give you guys the choice of the 4. Like that's what I would do. If you said choose your 4,
I think mathematically you're making the right decision. I mean, you're getting You're getting how many? You're getting
26.
8.
I'm getting 26, and I'm getting the rest of the playoff field here. So it's just kind of interesting because
Yeah, I was thinking 8 because of just the rest of the playoff field. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. If you made me take 4 teams, I wonder if I'd use a different method than both of you. Maybe I would just load up on projected WAR, because that to me is a reflection of overall strength and depth, right? Like just how much value, because you're assuming attrition for all these teams. You're assuming competency in the front office for these top end teams to go out and try and get some upgrades, even if, is it a perfect fit or is it just an upgrade? Either way, it's better than not getting those players, right? If I went that route, that would give me the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Phillies, and the Mariners, which would seem counterintuitive. Like if you were choosing 4, why would you choose the Phillies over the Braves? It's just believing that maybe that they are built better for playoff baseball. That could be part of the argument. Believing that their slow start has skewed our perception of how good that team really is. Like those would be the simple things you could look at. It's interesting the Blue Jays are a top 5 team in projected WAR, so they'd be the team that you just sort of catch on the other side rather than one that anyone would choose right now, especially with a couple key injuries they're dealing with. But I think the value is on the let the other person choose their 4 teams, but it's such a fun thing because you're basically 50-50 at this point on something like this.
That's a really good way of saying it, because I just wanted to throw a note in here real quick. 60 games, which is where we are at right now for most teams. 60 games is, when I looked it up, the stabilization point for how much your current record projects your future record. And when we talk about stabilization, we mean that you do better projecting the Dodgers using their current win percentage than you would using league average. So you stop regressing, completely to league average, and you start saying, ooh, I believe a 600 winning percentage to some degree. However, that degree is now, it's just flipped over from 50-50. So now it's like you're stepping into like, okay, I believe the Dodgers record more than I don't believe it at sort of a 55-45. That's what it means to stabilize. So, we do have a good sense of who the good teams are and who the bad teams are, but there is this sort of intriguing middle ground that I was mentioning: the Cubs, the Pirates, the Phillies. I mean, the Phillies, Sanchez, Wheeler, like if Nola is coming online, it was a good start last time out. Like, that, and then Harper and Schwarber, like it's a really good team, and you could see them trading Justin Crawford pretty easily, maybe for a big, big name. You could see them, just like pushing their chips in one last time. So, there's a lot of ways you can tell stories that these other teams, like the Blue Jays, just come online and play to how they're supposed to be and go white hot for a month or two and are fighting the Yankees for the top of the division. That's not impossible. So we know a little bit. We know something about these teams. We don't know everything just yet.
So the last question I have for you guys on this particular topic is, how important is it, if you're choosing the group of teams, if you're choosing your own 4, how important is it for that number to be 4 versus 3? If we lower the exercise and say you get your choice of 3 versus the field, do you want your 3, or does that flip you to wanting the field instead?
I think I want the field then. Just I don't get to have 2 in each league. Yeah, 4 out of 12 is 33%. A third of them, and then 3. You're getting down to a quarter. Yeah, I think I would actually flip on that.
I agree. I would flip on it for sure.
Yeah, so 4 is the key number if you're trying to pull this off with a friend. We're going to hit a quick break. When we come back, it's easy to forget what things looked like a year ago. We're going to dig into what was happening in the AL Central last year and try to decide if maybe it could happen again, but with the roles reversed in 2026. Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. Everything I see and hear about the Tigers right now, from national writers, national podcasters, national TV personalities, it's all speculation about where Tarik Skubal will go and the type of package the Tigers will get back in return. We're not going to do that today. there's plenty of time for that later, right? It's only June 3rd. If this is 2 months from now, if the Tigers are still bad, yeah, we'll talk a lot about it between now and then. But let's look at this Tigers team for a second, because, we were getting into this idea that, hey, maybe the Tigers could get some revenge on the Guardians this year, right? I mean, post All-Star break last season, the Guardians looked completely cooked. The suspensions for Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz on top of the deficit they were facing. The Tigers had looked like one of baseball's best teams through the first half of the season. So even if we had pulled back to June, most people would have looked at the Tigers versus the Guardians and said, yeah, this looks like a good year for the Tigers. This looks like a year where they're going to handily win the AL Central and maybe make a deep postseason run. I think you could pretty comfortably say most people are saying the Guardians are ahead of the Tigers by a healthy margin today, and they are more likely to be the team to beat coming out of the AL Central once we finally get to the end of the season. But what do things actually look like, and how similar are things now with the roles reversed where the Tigers have some big ground to make up on the Guardians?
I thought it would be instructive just to see last year's playoff odds as a graph. And first of all, oh man, what a devastating year for the Tigers last year. I mean, you see that orange bar just living at nearly 100% until the very last week of the season. And that's pretty devastating. But more instructive for me is just look at the Guardians with some up and down. And on July 5th, they had a 5.6% chance of making the playoffs to the Guardians. That's July 5th. So a month from now. Right now, the Tigers have a 13.9% chance of making the playoffs. So they have double the chance the Guardians had last year on July 1st, and they have a month to get better and be in a better spot than the Guardians were last year. And, one of the reasons that I think that this is instructive is because the Tigers, only two teams have a bigger disparity between their expected WOBA, their expected results, and their actual. And they're in the bottom five when it comes to, or the top five when it comes to days missed by injury. And they're now welcoming Kerry Carpenter back. Gleyber Torres hits a big home run, as he comes back. And just those two, if you start to look at the Tigers lineup with those two in it, you start to see like, oh, okay, this can work because, with them in it, now we're pushing Wenzel Perez, Matt Vierling, Zach McKinstry down to 7, 8, 9 and bench. And now can those guys put together 80, 90 WRC plus seasons? That's pretty good for the bottom of your lineup. That's not terrible. And so you start to say, okay, they're going to be competitive at every lineup position. They're pretty good defensively. The pitching is a little bit where I'm a little bit worried about. Tarek School comes back, but you're still got Casey Mize hurting. You don't have that much depth. You're kind of relying a fair amount on somebody like Melton, the rookie, to stay in there and give you some innings because there's not much in the coffers. They don't have other starting pitchers they can really go to. That's why they've been going to Cater Montero a lot. But if you say they've had the bad health luck, it's time for the good health luck, then that be the story of the Tigers comeback. The Tigers comeback is fueled by the pitcher staying healthy the rest of the season when Tarek comes back and the lineup, just sort of coalescing.
Well, the bullpen too, right? Like I remember early in the season, we were talking about this three-headed monster they're going to have at the back end with Kenley, Will Vest, and Finnegan, and they're at the top of the list of blown saves this year as an organization. So that you look at the lack of starting depth. Verlander really hasn't been a guy that has given them many innings this year. I mean, how many innings has Verlander thrown this year? He's only at 3 innings pitched, right? You're not expecting Verlander Cy Young version, but you're hoping to get more than 3 innings from him at this point. If you're the Tigers, so yeah, the pitching scares me a little bit, but there's also some really high end names at the top of that list. In the School Bowl, Framber, thought that he was going to be the second ace of that team. So, hopefully higher expectations for him. And then, the stabilizers in the Jack Flahertys and the Casey Mizes too. So, I like the idea of the, of the Gleyber Torreses and the Kerry Carpenters coming back and really lengthening out that lineup. But the pitching is just, that's the one, particularly on the bullpen side, that just has to perform better.
I think they'd be a really difficult team to forecast right now for an exercise like the one we just did, or even just if we were drafting the entire league, trying to see who could get the World Series winner. Where the Tigers go in that middle would be kind of fascinating. And the reason is, I don't know what their threshold is, where they would need to be internally to feel like they're close enough to keep Skubal and push Chips in. I don't know where that line is exactly. I don't know how good they have to be in the next 2 months for that good enough line to be met, and then to get the buy-in they need to get upgrades and just keep on pushing for this year.
I bet it's mathematical. I bet it's like literally as simple as playoff odds.
What do you think the line should be? If you were president of baseball operations in Detroit, where would you want that number to be in the days leading into the deadline before deciding to part ways with Skubal?
I think it has to be above, 33 or whatever, like 1-3 shot, right? So better than the Orioles' chance. The Blue Jays right now have a 41% chance of making the playoffs. You wouldn't expect them to sell. The Rangers have a 47% chance, and people want DeGrom on every team. I don't think the Rangers will sell. So what's another one? The Cardinals at 22%. See, I might sell there. So I hate to be as basic as setting a line sort of arbitrarily at 1-3, but I mean 1-3 is pretty good chance.
1-3 with maybe some context that projections aren't necessarily capturing, in the sense of like how banged up are some of the other teams. Certain injuries
also getting a draft
year that
pick
gets modeled in.
Skubal leaving, like you're definitely going to put the if that still exists, I guess you're definitely going to put the
depending on the outcome of So, well, you mean if you hold on to him?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine they'd phase that in after this season. Like, how could you make decisions about this offseason not knowing if those qualifying offer comp picks are going away? Like, that should be clarified ahead of time. We have this problem in keeper leagues and fantasy baseball. I would imagine Major League Baseball has this sorted out. No?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's an interesting thought for the trade deadline. I mean, as you say that, I'm like, what? We might have a more interesting trade deadline this year, just because of the unknown around, qualifying offer and, the free agent landscape in terms of, what the reward is of from the team's perspective of keeping a guy through the year and slapping the qualifying offer on him.
If there's a salary floor, a hard salary floor and a hard cap, and you're the Tigers, you might say, well, maybe things change and we want to spend on Skubal next year. Like if we're forced to spend up, And also an interesting is, what do you do if you're like the Mets or, a well-heeled team that, you think that maybe a hard cap is coming? Would you trade? I wouldn't throw Soto on there, but like, would you trade an expensive player that's still a good player?
That's a tough one because who's because Bo Bichette, he's got opt-outs, right? So I
can't think of who exactly it would
Luis
be.
Robert. I mean, Francisco Lindor,
Trout.
Oh, you're saying who they trade? Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying like an expensive player on a selling team that would not normally change hands. I was thinking of a more expensive team like the Mets, but could the Padres? If the Padres sold, would they be able to get rid of one of their big contracts because like a Rays or Marlins say, we might have to spend anyway? Yeah.
I mean, that is making a big bet on an outcome you don't know,
and which they don't normally do.
That's
don't
not
do
how they
that.
operate. I think they
Yeah.
would wait until they had to make a move like that and work it out in
That
the
might
spring.
mean a less active trade deadline than usual.
I think what it's going to mean is it's going to be the fringy teams for odds purposes are probably more likely to buy than to sell, given all the uncertainty. Because some of these organizations are going to have, if there are significant financial implications to the new CBA, they're going to have to change a lot about the way they're operating. So within the current constraints, within the knowns, say, like, let's just take this shot while we can before things get more difficult for the way we're trying to build, right? That to me would be the common conversation you'd be having with a lot of middle ground teams here. And the Tigers, I mean, they've won consecutive games Monday and Tuesday against the Rays for the first time since May 3rd and 4th. That's how bad May ended up being for them.
This is the first 2 games with Carey and Glaber back?
Carey came back, I think, Sunday. Glaber came back Tuesday. So Tuesday was the first time they had them both available in a while. And I do think it adds a lot of length to that lineup. I mean, look, the quality of that lineup as far as, like, is it a top end, top 5 group? No. But I do think it's 2 to 5% better than league average, which is kind of where most playoff teams are going to be by WRC plus at the end of the season. I think that's pretty much who they are. So they're key for me. If they end up being buyers, if they rally back, the schedule is not easy. I was looking at their schedule in June and July. They've got 2 series with the Yankees. They catch the Phillies in an interleague matchup. They get a little bit of home cooking in the AL Central. That'll help them maybe make up some ground too. But the bullpen, Jed mentioned it before. Like, I think we were hopeful that Kenley Jansen had one more solid season left in the tank. I think we were really optimistic about Vest coming off the season he had a year ago, and Finnegan might be a little underrated when things are going well. But if they were the Three Dragons meme, the 38-year-old version of Kenley Jansen is the dragon with his tongue hanging out, and you're just like, oh man, like, if he was old Kenley, yes, this would work. But that's been kind of the recurring theme for me, is like the top end of that Tigers bullpen has been a problem, even when they've been able to execute using a lot of relievers in the absence of starters effectively. It's just not a trio you fear at the end of the game. So I think that's probably where they have the most work to do if all the things we outlined before start kind of coming back over the course of these next couple months.
Yeah, even, Kenley, I'm looking, has a 30% strikeout rate, but he's given up 2.5 homers every 9 innings right now. So he's walking 14.5. He's still striking guys out, but when he's not striking them out, he's seemingly either walking them or giving up a home run. So, nobody gets to play forever. And, those 2 guys, Finnegan and Jansen, are at the bottom of the, WAR spectrum for their pitching staff, right? Both on the negative side. And these are both guys that, they had put a lot of chips on the table thinking that they were going to be a big part of the back end of that bullpen.
I do think there's a little bit of a shakeup going on in that bullpen. Drew Anderson and Drew Summers. Will Vest has been better of late. It's every year with a bullpen, you're kind of shaking it up and figuring out what you've got in any given year. So it may not be as bad as it looks so far.
Yeah, I mean, I get, and Drew Anderson is he's seeming like he's pitching well, but also blown a number of saves too. So, that's just, you got to have somebody down there that you can trust in a big moment to execute the stuff that they have. And right now, if I'm AJ Hinch, I'm flipping a coin.
Yeah.
Critical stretch. We've said it time and time again with this Tigers team. By WAR, they are the 10th best team in the big leagues. Dodgers, Yankees, Phillies, Mariners, Blue Jays, Braves, Red Sox, Mets, Brewers, Tigers. Everyone that heard me say Red Sox and Mets just shook their heads like, come on, nerds. Those teams don't belong up there. But that's, hey, I'm just reporting what the projections say. Okay. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to take a look at ABS challenges now that we're 2 months into the season. Who is doing well and who is struggling so far? Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. We had a funny ABS moment that got us thinking a little bit about the leaderboards. We'll kind of start with this odd sequence that Jed pointed out. This would have been from, I believe, Monday's game between the Marlins and Nationals. Cade Cavalli pitching to Kyle Stowers early in the game. There's a delayed strike call, I believe it was, behind home plate, and both players challenged almost simultaneously. Jed, you dug into this.
Yeah.
What happened here, and what can you actually challenge against yourself accidentally if there's some kind of miscommunication on a ball strike call like that?
Yeah, and we were texting, or it was actually on the call that we were going back and forth on this. And I think the more we watched it, the more we these Pandora's box was potentially opening, right? Of the possible outcomes here, because Cade Cavalli, it's a big moment. It's bases loaded, 3-1 count. Owen Casey's up, and he throws him this front hip two-seamer that Cavalli thinks comes back, and Casey doesn't think comes back. Jim Wolf is behind the plate, calls it a strike, and what I'm assuming is the delayed call, because you can see Owen Casey actually challenge before the visual cue of a strike. Because so what I'm assuming is that the audibly Casey could hear it before Cavalli saw it. And so Cavalli's no, that's a strike, emotionally, right? Because if he walks this guy, it's another run. And so emotionally, he's he's challenging, and Cavalli ends up challenging before Casey does, right?
But by seconds, by
milliseconds, right?
They're
it's
both moving their hands to their heads immediately.
Yes, but Cavalli, I think, is just a little bit more emotional about the moment, and he probably does it a little quicker, right? Because he's just so worked up. So we got to
still,
thinking,
if you want to see, you kind of see Cavalli's Casey's hands going up, and Cavalli's hands already up there.
Yeah, so they, I think they probably start at the same time, but Cavalli's a little bit more frantic because I think he's, a little more emotional given the moment. It's the top of the first inning. He's already got the bases loaded. I think he'd already given up a run or maybe two, and so he, So like I said, he goes and he challenges. So we were like, well, what, let's say in this moment that Owen Casey hadn't challenged, right, and Cavalli is out there saying, hey, I challenged, he challenged it before Wolfie calls the strike, right? But so unfortunately, all of our hypotheses were and potential drama was negated by all this, because I did get a clarification. So there's a rule that defense can't challenge a strike and offense can't challenge a ball. So pretty elegant solution.
That's an elegant rule right there.
Yes.
That's just it staves off all sorts of weird things. It's
Yeah.
Nope, you can't. Sorry, you can't.
Exactly.
It's a good acknowledgement that over 162 games, something weird could happen, much like what was happening on Monday night. And you don't want some dumb thing where it's nope, a card laid is a card played. Once you tap your head, that's a challenge, even if the call went in your favor. Sorry. It's good to have that all ironed out ahead of time.
Yeah. Can you imagine if, if Casey if this rule didn't exist, Casey, decided not to challenge, all right, it was close enough for me not to challenge. And
he went first.
Yeah. And or to your point is Cavalli touched his hat first. We go to instant replay on who challenged first.
Look at the video. No, look, the arm's going up.
Yeah, exactly. And then Cavalli's standing out there I literally just challenged a pitch that ended up being called a ball, right? A pitch that was called a strike, and I overturned it to make it a ball, and I walked in a run because I challenged it. So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there's some underlying interesting things going on here too, which is that, the two worst people at challenging in terms of historical results so far in the ABS system, the hitter and the pitcher, both challenged that pitch. It's the catchers who are doing well in this, and the hitters and pitchers are doing. In fact, the pitchers are the worst at it, and I think it may have something to do with what you touched on, the sort of the emotion there for Cavalli. He hadn't actually had a score against him yet, and so this is the top of the first, bases loaded. This would have made it 1-0. 0.
Okay.
So he's like, no,
Okay.
that was a strike, right? You know, but like we've all seen slowed up mechanics of pitchers where like their head is snapping. You know, Trevor May talked about like, you know, not even really, seeing the ball enter the glove, like hit the glove, like because he's like, you know, pulling his head down to get that last bit of velo. And so, yeah, pitchers are not in a great position to actually challenge anything. So, because they're also looking up post frame job, right? Like if they don't see it right away, they look up and they see the glove holding it, like, you know, oh yeah, that was middle, you know. But there was an interesting story earlier from Spencer Nussbaum about the Nationals catchers getting better at framing, and that may be adversely affecting their ABS numbers, their challenge numbers, because the Nationals aren't great there. The theory maybe being that like they're fooling themselves. You know, they frame it so well. They're like, oh man, that must have been a strike. So I thought I would just throw up the best ABS catchers by overturns versus expectation and their framing percentile. And there's, you know, at first glance, you think maybe there's some truth here because though Dylan Dingler is a very good framer and he's number 1 in overturns, Salvador Perez is not a good framer. He's second. Tyler Stevenson is one of the worst framers in the league. He's third. Hunter Goodman, not a good framer, 4th. Carson Kelly, not a good framer, 5th. Drake Baldwin, not a good framer, 6th. And so that's at least some cursory evidence to this. But when I asked, when I asked AI, to be honest, but when I asked AI to calculate the correlation between these two, which is a very simple calculation between two data sets, it said it was a very small correlation there between framing and ABS. And I think that makes some sense because, you still have Austin Wells, good framer on there. Dylan Dingler is number 1. Patrick Bailey is a good ABSer, and he's one of the best framers. But there was a slightly better correlation on the other end, but when it comes to hitters, and here are the best hitters that are good at challenging: C.J. Abrams, Xander Bogaerts, Isaac Paredes, Davis Schneider, Taylor Ward, Aaron Judge. So these guys, I thought they were interesting to put up here because there was a slight correlation between your chase rate and your ABS. And I think that makes sense because you have a good sense of where the zone is if your chase rate is good. It's not a strong correlation, though. And maybe that has something to do with the mechanics of the swing. Maybe they're jerkier swings. Maybe people there are more still heads than others, like maybe it's the same thing with the same mechanic that makes pitchers bad at it where they're jerking their head. Maybe there's some people who have sort of more violent swings that, lose track of exactly where the strike zone is.
Well, and I think it just goes back to like the emotions of the moment too, right?
That too, yeah.
I just like I hate to keep coming back to this because, but at the same time, like this is also what makes good entertainment, like you have a big moment, right? And like it's like now you have this decision to make in a matter of seconds, right? Maybe in some cases less. And like this is and I'm surprised, I guess, that the correlation isn't a little bit higher on the chase rate because not only do you have to make a decision, you also have to when you're hitting, you have to make a decision in a split second to decide to hit it and then actually hit the ball. But at the same time is like, you let that ball go, the emotion of like, hey, I thought that was a ball, or like, oh, I didn't see that one well and it actually is a strike. That's a pretty quick calculation to make too. And I do think that the guys that have been playing at the major league level who haven't been exposed to that mindset, right? Of like, not only do I have to decide whether or not I'm going to swing, but they're not conditioned yet to make that split second decision on the one that I took. Did I just not see it well and it is a strike, or did I see it well and it's actually a ball?
Yeah, you got to decide almost faster than you can fully ask yourself the question. It has to be like an instinct, like a reaction almost.
Exactly.
Where you immediately know. I would imagine too, maybe over time we're going to find that certain players are great at challenges on certain edges of the zone, really good at knowing if a strike or ball is called properly in, down, up, away. I feel like that might also fluctuate. You might not be good at all 4 of those, but you're good at a couple of those. Maybe you're really good at the one that you get burned on the most. Like if, let's say you get trouble with down and away breaking stuff, maybe you've just got a good sense of when, okay, that was actually too far down or too far away. So I can challenge there because you're thinking about taking there anyway. And you're really kind of hyper focused on where the pitch went because you don't want to swing and you were anticipating it. There could be a lot of little things within your approach that kind of guide that.
Another added piece of context is that there are, I don't know if they're blanket strategies by teams, but there are pretty close to blanket strategies by teams. I mean, I would just like to put forth the Miami Marlins, who are calling pitches from the dugout for pitchers and seem to be the type of team that might have a blanket strategy. They have 109 overturns, 109 challenges as catchers. That's number 1 in the big leagues. The White Sox 97, Brewers 84, Athletics 84. So, and the Royals with Sal there, they're 5th with 80. So 109, they're way out in front with the catchers, but with the hitters, 3rd to bottom. 45 challenges from their hitters. Only the Padres and Brewers. Oh, wait a second. The Brewers are doing the same thing. The Brewers and the Marlins have basically told their hitters, don't do it. Don't do it. I know you want to, but don't do it. Don't do it unless maybe they have the thing where it's like, don't do it unless it's the 9th inning and you just struck out with guys on base. Like that's and you think it was a ball.
I think I saw 2 in one sequence from Gary Sanchez. I want to say it was over the weekend in the game against Houston that they lost.
Gary Sanchez as a hitter or as a catcher?
Two as a hitter, and he lost them both, if I remember correctly. But it was
some bench, grab some pine meat.
It was top of the 9th. It was top of the 9th on the road though, where it was like,
okay, yeah,
these will expire. These coupons are not good tomorrow. Cash them in. Go get the $1 off your French fries, like because it's today or never. That was the situation, but it's a little strange to me that I think it's there's 2 ways to look at it. One is you say, well, we want to save our challenges for our catcher because we feel like we can win there. Our catchers can win those calls more often than our hitters can. So if you look at a team like the Brewers, okay, 58% success rate, that's kind of around league average. It's not like they're crushing it back there, but they're horrible as a team challenging as hitters. They're 3rd from the bottom at 38% success. Again, smaller sample and you might be throwing them away in some situations. I think some of this could just be, we need a little more data. But these early trends are very interesting. Like why, who's using them? Why are they using them? And are they good at it? The Marlins it's clear just, 65 challenge wins. Next closest team is 49. That's a huge gap because they are using all of their challenges or as many as they can when they're in the field, when they're behind the plate. And they, like the Brewers, are barely making any challenges when they're at the plate.
And why are the Twins, who are barely any better than the Brewers, they have a 44% chance of overturning, which, yes, it's like 3 or 4 ranks better than the Brewers, but it's also below average. Why are they giving them 81 challenges, most in the big leagues? I mean, the Rockies are second with 69. So the Twins are also, kind of the opposite, where you're like, what are you guys doing at the plate? You're not. I mean, they're
weird. This is what's great about this, right? Is like each organization is going to have their own philosophy on this, right? They're all playing the same game, and how you choose to deploy your strategy it will, in the long run, affect the outcomes marginally, right? But like it also is like it's fun to talk about. It's fun to talk about how it creates these moments where we can actually look back and say these guys like what did we learn from this? How do we adjust moving forward? And or even during the season, how are we going to adjust this? Because if you're the Twins and you're getting 44% of these right, like guys, maybe as an offense, we should probably save these for 7th, 8th, 9th inning, right? Like big moments that are gonna literally are outcome affecting. Because we could get into this debate about a 1-1 pitch that's called a strike that now you go from a 1-2 count to a 2-1 count, that leverage pitch. Well, if it's the 3rd inning, how much effect does that actually have on the game, right? Versus a pitcher, so the idea of the leveraged count is great, but does it matter? Probably doesn't matter as much early in the game as it does in the later part of the game from an offensive perspective.
Oh, 100%. I mean, Oyster Analytics, did like kind of did a ranking of the best times to challenge. And of course, all of it was, bases loaded, ninth inning, eighth inning,
Sure.
all leverage moments. So that is interesting. But there's also this aspect that, like, if you challenge and you win, you keep the challenge. So I tend to think that people are going to follow the Marlins, which is to say, give your catchers more leeway. Because if they're winning 60% of the time, you might get yourself an extra challenge, right? So now you're like, oh, we're winning enough on the first challenge that we actually average 3 or 4 challenges a game. That's like getting that extra challenge could mean a lot, and it could add up to be a lot. And so I actually think the Marlins have the correct strategy here. And I bet you if we broke it down by inning, they might have some of the earliest catcher challenges. But those are ones that their catchers think that they can win, and that means that they can just bank the extra challenge,
Yeah, and bringing it back to catchers too, just from like where we started this on some of the guys that don't quote unquote don't frame as well, right? From a metric perspective, but they're some of the best challengers, right? I remember having this conversation with Jason Castro. And Jason was a guy where, he's like, I want to be able to like build a rapport with the umpire. This is obviously pre-challenge, but like, he's like, I'm not going to frame a pitch I know as a ball. Right. And I could see Sal Perez like an egregious ball, right? Like if it's something that's really, really close, like obviously he's going to try to frame it. But
the ones that people are like, look at this joke,
Yeah, exactly. Like that was kind of the that was, and like guys would chirp about that too, right? Like we know when a pitch is 2 inches outside, right? 3 inches outside. Right. And you'd see these guys framing these pitches, and it'd be like, all right, like move it along, right? Like this is a joke, throw it back. Right, throw the ball back. We all know it's a ball. And so it's interesting to me to think about.
Castro was a really good framer once he got into it. I mean, early on in his career, maybe not, but he was a really good framer in the meat of his career.
No. But see, that's like the metric perspective, right? Of like, of grading it. And as we all know, like, as soon as you create that incentive, like if he, in his early part of his career, it was more about like getting the big call when it mattered. Right. So like if he's out there, because that dynamic, the relationship between the umpire and the catcher was like, hey, don't show me up. Right. Like if you're framing all these pitches and trying to make them look good when we both know they're 3 inches outside or 3 inches high, whatever it was, you're making me look bad. Now, as an umpire, I'm being objectively graded. They don't really care as much about that, like, how it looks. But the guys, like, and I think about Sal in particular, he's like, I know it's a ball. The umpire now knows it's a ball. Why am I framing it? Right. So he's kind of this, he's kind of this crossover from the old mentality of, that like how it looks visually, how it's presented visually, and the dynamic, that existed between the umpire and the catcher, to now we're starting to get umpires that are graded objectively on this fixed strike zone, to now being graded as a catcher on your framing metrics, to now the ABS challenge. So to me, Sal is like a really good, he's a really good example because he's been playing for so long and catching for so long that he's kind of seen this the full evolution of where we are now.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm just reading an old piece that I did with Jason Castro on framing, and he talked about the angle that he was taking for lefties and righties, and I was able to show that, like, he just set up completely differently for lefties and righties, especially when it came to the angle of his butt. Like, he was giving the umpire more room in certain ways to get in. And I wonder if there's some second level, third level. Yeah, you say this is early on in it, and maybe some of those correlations will tighten up with more sample, with more players in there, and then maybe also catchers will learn certain techniques for ABS. Maybe there's a way to frame where you don't fool yourself. Maybe
Yeah,
I don't know.
I
Maybe
think
it's
that's it.
catching it later, or
Right.
something else.
I think that's
Yeah.
going to be really important, right? Is like not fooling yourself, right?
Yeah.
Get so good at making balls look like strikes that you fool yourself, right? And I hope I didn't present that like Jason was an unbelievable defensive catcher who framed everything. I just remember having a conversation with him about that relationship between umpire and himself, and it was just like I want to make sure that I build that rapport, I build that trust with the umpire, that if I frame a pitch, then, so he's almost picking his moments where it's like, okay, this, I know, like, I think this is a ball, but it looks close enough that I want to make sure that I have that rapport with the umpire, that if I do frame it and I stick it, he's going to believe it more that it is a strike.
Got a did you notice thing from the leaderboards here to tie this all together, by the way. We were talking about the Twins before and how there's an interesting difference in how much they let their hitters challenge. Leading the league, 81 challenges, 44% success rate. There's one thing that stands out to me, though. If you look at the number of times their challenge flipped into a walk result, they're tied with the Orioles with the most at 8. On the fielding side, for at-bats or plate appearances they turn into strikeouts with a challenge, they're number 1 with 20. They have turned, with challenges, 20 pitches into strikeouts that wouldn't have been. So there's definitely something about their decision to use those maybe at the end on like action spots a little bit differently, as opposed to maybe challenging frequently early in count. So the timing of the challenges within the count, I think, might vary a little bit in some of these strategies too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is maybe they said like do it on the last pitch, whereas Marlins are like, hey, if you think you're right, there's an argument for both. Doing it on the last pitch, that's big deal. You just turned an out or you turn something into an out, or you turn something out of an out. Like that's huge, right? But if you add up the leverage, you like going to 2-1 or to 1-2, like that can be just as important.
Yeah, just thought it was interesting. I don't know if it's inherently better, worse, same, because it does matter at various points. Obviously, changing the count will change the outcome in a pretty big way, or at least change the expected outcome in a pretty big way. But clearly something about the end of the plate appearance matters to the Twins, at least based on what we're seeing up to this point in the season. We need to go. On our way out the door, a reminder, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. That's the best way to send us a mailbag question for a future episode. Just drop on in the mailbag channel, fire away there. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed it, drop us a like, leave a rating, or sound off in the comments. We'll see you next time.